There are stories that defy easy explanation, cases where the known facts lead not to a conclusion, but to a question mark so large it eclipses everything else. This is one of those stories. It's a story about a brilliant young man on the cusp of his future, a night of celebration that dissolved into a nightmare, and a single, inexplicable moment frozen in time on a grainy security camera video. It's the story of a disappearance so clean, so complete, it feels less like a crime and more like a magic trick. This is the story of Brian Schaefer, the man who walked into a bar and simply vanished. Our story begins in Columbus, Ohio, in the spring of 2006. It was a time of transition, of thawing ice and the promise of new beginnings. For 27-year-old Brian Schaefer, that promise was exceptionally bright. He was in his second year of medical school at the prestigious Ohio State University, a demanding path that he was navigating with intelligence and determination. He was handsome, well-liked, and deeply in love with another medical student, a bright young woman named Alexis Wagoner. Their future together seemed not just possible, but inevitable. They had plans, big plans. A trip to Miami to celebrate the start of spring break was just days away. A sun-drenched escape from the sterile halls of the medical library. Friends and family believed an engagement was on the horizon, the next logical step in a perfect love story. Brian was, by all accounts, a man who had everything to live for. But beneath the surface of this idyllic picture, there were currents of sorrow. Just a few weeks earlier, Brian's mother, Renee, had lost her battle with cancer. The loss was a profound blow. Brian, the devoted son, had been a pillar of strength for his family, but the grief was a heavy burden to carry. His father, Randy, saw the exhaustion in his son's eyes. He saw the toll that late-night study sessions and the quiet morning had taken. On the evening of March 31, 2006, the last night anyone would see him, Brian shared a steak dinner with his dad. It was a moment of connection, a father and son sharing a meal before the brief respite of spring break. Randy noted his son's fatigue, a weariness that went deeper than just studying. He advised Brian to take it easy, to perhaps skip the planned night out with his friend, William Clint Florence. But Brian was young, the weight of exams had lifted, and a night of release felt necessary. He assured his dad he'd be fine and headed out to meet his friend, stepping into a night from which he would never return. The chosen venue to kick off the celebration was the Ugly Tuna Saloona, a popular second-story bar in the South Campus Gateway complex. The name was quirky, the atmosphere loud and energetic, a typical college haunt filled with music, laughter, and the easy camaraderie of students letting off steam. To get to the bar, you had to take an escalator, a slow, mechanical ascent that delivered patrons to the entrance. This escalator, and the security camera trained on it, would become the silent, unblinking witness to a mystery that would baffle investigators for years to come. Brian met Clint Florence around 9 p.m. The plan was simple: a few drinks, a tour of other local bars, and a final return to the Ugly Tuna to cap off the night. It was a well-worn ritual for countless students in Columbus. That night, Brian Schaefer was just one of the crowd, another face in a sea of youthful exuberance, unaware that he was walking toward an invisible line, a point of no return. The night was young, the city was alive, and for a few hours, the weight of grief and the pressure of medical school could be held at bay. As the night deepened, the two friends moved through the city's veins, a string of bars marking their path. According to Clint Florence, they established a rhythm, one shot of hard liquor at each stop. It was a night fueled by alcohol and the kinetic energy of a city after dark. They were celebrating freedom, a week-long reprieve from the crushing demands of their future profession. Sometime after midnight, their duo became a trio. They met up with Meredith Reed, a friend of Clint's, who joined them for the final leg of their journey. It was Meredith who drove them back to where the night began, back to the Ugly Tuna Saloona for a last round of drinks before closing time. The circle was closing. At approximately 1:15 a.m., the security camera at the top of the escalator dutifully recorded their return. Brian, Clint, and Meredith ascended into the bar, rejoining the thrum of the late-night crowd. The camera, a passive observer, captured the mundane moment, unaware of its future significance. Inside, the music was loud, the conversations a chaotic symphony. It was an environment where you could easily lose track of someone, a place where a person could blend into the background momentarily lost in the press of bodies. And somewhere within that noisy, crowded space, Brian Schaefer began to drift away from his friends. The clock was ticking relentlessly toward 2 a.m., the mandatory closing time for bars in Columbus. Inside the Ugly Tuna Saloona, the lights were about to come up, signaling the end of the night's revelries. It was in these final moments that the first threads of the mystery began to be woven. Brian had separated from Clint and Meredith. According to his friends, this wasn't immediately alarming. In a crowded bar, people wander. They go to the restroom. They talk to other people. They step outside for a breath of air. But the final, concrete sighting of Brian Schaefer is a moment preserved forever on that same security camera. At approximately 1:55 a.m., the footage shows Brian just outside the entrance of the bar. He is seen chatting casually with two young women. It's a brief, unremarkable interaction. He says his goodbyes to them and then turns, moving back toward the entrance of the bar. Just off camera, he appears to be re-entering the establishment. This is the last time he was ever verifiably seen. As the bar began to empty, a river of students flowing back out into the cool night air, Clint Florence and Meredith Reed waited. They stood outside, scanning the faces in the departing crowd, expecting Brian to emerge at any moment. They called his cell phone again and again. Each call went unanswered, eventually connecting to his voicemail. They waited. The crowd thinned. The streetlights cast long shadows on the emptying sidewalks. Still, there was no sign of Brian. Finally, they came to a logical, if slightly annoyed, conclusion. Brian must have slipped out without telling them. Perhaps he'd grown tired of the noise and the crowd and simply decided to walk home to his apartment, which wasn't far. It was a plausible explanation. It was the only explanation that made sense. So, they too left, heading home, assuming they would reconnect with their friend in the morning. They had no way of knowing that their assumption was wrong, and that the search they had just begun in earnest would soon be joined by family, police, and a community desperate for answers. The night had ended, but the nightmare was just beginning. The weekend passed in a deepening fog of confusion and concern. Alexis Wagoner, Brian's girlfriend, was in Toledo visiting her family before their planned Miami trip. She tried calling Brian repeatedly. Each call was a new wave of anxiety. It wasn't like him to be out of touch for so long, not with their vacation just around the corner. Brian's father, Randy, also tried to reach his son. His calls met with the same disquieting silence. The hours stretched into days. By Monday morning, April 3rd, the anxiety had bloomed into full-blown panic. Brian, the diligent, responsible medical student, missed his flight to Miami. This was the definitive red flag, an action so out of character that it could not be ignored or explained away. The time for assumptions was over. Brian Schaefer was officially reported as a missing person. The Columbus Police Department was now involved, and what started as a simple case of a student who failed to come home after a night out would quickly evolve into one of the most perplexing mysteries the city had ever seen. The search for Brian Schaefer had begun. The initial focus of the police investigation was, naturally, the Ugly Tuna Saloona. It was the last place Brian was known to be. The single most crucial piece of evidence was the security camera footage from the escalator entrance. Investigators watched the tape with painstaking attention to detail, their eyes tracing the movements of every person who entered and exited the bar that night. The footage confirmed the timeline provided by Clint and Meredith. It showed the three friends arriving at 1:15 a.m. It showed Brian outside, talking to the two women at 1:55 a.m., and then turning back toward the bar. And then it showed nothing. The police meticulously reviewed the rest of the recording, accounting for every single person seen entering the bar that night. They watched as each patron, one by one, eventually left. Every person who went up that escalator was seen coming back down. Every person, that is, except for one. Brian Schaefer was seen entering, but he was never seen leaving. It was a digital ghost, a man who had seemingly evaporated into thin air. This central, impossible fact: a man enters a building, but never exits, forced investigators to consider every possibility, no matter how remote. The Ugly Tuna Saloona was located on the second floor of the South Campus Gateway complex. The primary public entrance and exit was the escalator, which was under constant surveillance. Was there another way out? Police scoured the building's layout. They discovered a service exit, a back door not intended for public use. This door opened into a hallway that, at the time in 2006, led to a chaotic and messy construction site. The area was a maze of unfinished walls, debris, and potential hazards. Could Brian, perhaps in an intoxicated state, have stumbled through the service door and gotten lost or injured in the construction zone? It was a plausible theory. It offered a potential escape route, a way he could have bypassed the main camera. But an extensive search of the construction site, a painstaking process involving search teams and dogs, yielded absolutely nothing. There was no sign of Brian, no trace of blood, no piece of clothing, no indication that he had ever been there. The service door led not to an answer, but to another dead end. The search expanded outward from the bar in concentric circles of desperation. Police officers, aided by search dogs, combed the surrounding neighborhood. They peered into dumpsters, searched alleyways, and knocked on doors, showing Brian's picture to residents, asking the same question over and over: "Have you seen this man?" The city of Columbus even granted them the grim permission to search the sewer system, a dark, subterranean world of tunnels beneath the city streets. Every lead was pursued, every possible location searched, but the result was always the same: nothing. Brian's apartment was exactly as he had left it. His car was still parked in its usual spot. It was as if he had stepped out of his life for a night of fun and then simply ceased to exist. His digital footprint also went cold. His cell phone and credit cards were never used again. There was just a single, tantalizing, and ultimately frustrating clue. For a short time after his disappearance, calls to Brian's cell phone would ring before going to voicemail. This gave his family a sliver of hope that the phone was still on, that he was still out there. One night, his girlfriend Alexis heard it ring 3 times in a row, a strange anomaly in the pattern of calls going straight to voicemail. A subsequent ping from the phone was traced to a cell tower in Hilliard, a suburb about 14 miles northwest of Columbus. But it was a fleeting signal, a ghost in the machine. It led to a search of the area, but like every other search, it turned up no new evidence. The phone was never found. As the days turned into weeks, with no sign of Brian, the investigation turned from a search for a missing person to a more focused criminal inquiry. Detectives began to scrutinize the people Brian was with on that final night. Meredith Reed, who had joined the group late, was questioned and, according to police, passed a polygraph test. She was cooperative and provided what little information she had. The focus then shifted to Clint Florence, the friend who had been with Brian from the beginning of the night. His behavior after the disappearance raised questions. While he initially spoke with police, he later declined to take a polygraph test, hiring a lawyer instead. This refusal, while his legal right, cast a shadow of suspicion. Why wouldn't he take the test to clear his name and help find his friend? Friends of Brian and the Schaefer family grew frustrated with what they perceived as a lack of cooperation. The police, however, stated publicly that while his refusal was noted, they had no physical evidence to name him as a suspect in any crime. He remained a person of interest, a keeper of the final hours of Brian's known whereabouts. But the trail stopped there. Without a body, without a crime scene, there was nothing to link him or anyone else to Brian's disappearance. In the vacuum of evidence, theories began to multiply, ranging from the plausible to the fantastical. The most straightforward theory was that Brian met with foul play. Perhaps he ran into the wrong person inside the bar or in the immediate vicinity after finding an unmonitored exit. An argument, a robbery gone wrong. It was a scenario that played out all too often in cities across the country. But the lack of any physical evidence, the absence of any struggle, made this theory difficult to prove. Another theory was that Brian had an accident. Could he have wandered into the construction site and fallen, becoming trapped in a place so inaccessible that searchers simply missed him? It seemed unlikely, given the thoroughness of the search, but not impossible. Then there were the more complex and darker speculations. Some tried to connect his disappearance to the so-called smiley face killer theory, a controversial hypothesis suggesting a string of young men found drowned across the Midwest were the victims of a serial killer or killers. Brian fit the general profile, but investigators found no concrete evidence to support this link. The most painful theory for his loved ones to consider was that Brian disappeared intentionally. Was the pressure of medical school, combined with the recent, devastating loss of his mother, simply too much to bear? Had he decided to walk away from it all and start a new life? On the surface, it seemed improbable, He was in love, on the verge of a romantic vacation with the woman he intended to marry. He had a bright future as a doctor ahead of him. Yet, he was grieving. He was exhausted. A cryptic post on his MySpace page, where he mentioned wanting to be on a beach, away from it all, was seized upon by some as a clue. But was it a genuine cry for help, or just the idle daydream of an overworked student? The lawyer for Clint Florence would later suggest to a private investigator that he had heard from police that they believed Brian was alive. But this was hearsay, a whisper in a storm of unanswered questions. For Brian's family, the idea that he would willingly inflict such pain upon them was unthinkable. It simply didn't align with the man they knew and loved. The years that followed were a testament to a father's unwavering love and a community's refusal to forget. Randy Schaefer, Brian's dad, became the public face of the search. He dedicated his life to finding his son, working tirelessly with investigators, speaking to the media, and keeping Brian's story in the public eye. He was a man hollowed out by a double tragedy: the loss of his wife to disease and the inexplicable vanishing of his son. He followed up on every tip, no matter how outlandish, hoping each phone call would be the one that brought an answer. But the answers never came. Then, in 2008, tragedy struck the Schaefer family again. During a severe windstorm, Randy was outside clearing debris in his yard when a branch fell from a tree, killing him instantly. It was a cruel, random act of nature that brought a tragic end to a father's quest. The search for Brian was now left to his brother, Derek, and a legion of online sleuths and true crime enthusiasts who had become captivated by the case. The disappearance of Brian Schaefer occurred just as the digital age was truly taking hold. It has been called one of the first great mysteries of the social media era. In the years since he vanished, online communities have dissected every detail of the case. They've analyzed the security footage frame by frame, debated the layout of the ugly tuna saloona, and proposed countless theories. The case has become a modern legend, a story told and rattled on podcasts, in articles, and on forums across the internet. It is a puzzle with a missing piece right in the center. The technology that was meant to provide answers, the security camera instead, only deepened the mystery. Every other person was accounted for, their digital breadcrumb trail leading them safely out of the bar and back into their lives. Brian's trail simply ends. He walked toward the door of a bar on a Friday night and stepped into history, leaving behind a legacy not of a life lived, but of a question that still hangs unanswered. In the Columbus night, what happened to Brian Schaefer?